ganja flow. We're talking 1,000 AD or CE, all right? And then 100 years later, we got 1165 Prester John letters popping off, and they're searching for him 100 years later. And we got a founding youth in Florida.
How do I even?
Described as Western Ganges. To distinguish them from the Eastern Ganges who ruled Odisha. Alright, man, this is dope, man. There's a lot going on in the ganja flow, tracing the Kanka ganja rulers in the West Coast. Wow, man. Alright, so you see that it's interchangeable, Kanka and ganja. So by the time we get to this ganja over here,
that's annoying. Over here.
Because we're still connected with the Ganges. They make him an African man. Right? We remember where
better, Mike.
West Africa, according to the hijack.
What the fuck?
Not just the Moors today, but those that were leading the charge right back then. Did they ever lose power, or did they create a strong man? $65 million question. What's going on with God? All right. Let's go. Back to the dock. We're going to get a couple of docks for the dismount.
Every mile at the Hyundai. Welcome to Mexico Unexplained, where we will explore the magic, the mysteries, and the miracles of Mexico. This series presents information based partly on theory and conjecture. The podcaster's purpose is to suggest a possible explanation, but not necessarily the only ones to the subjects we will examine.
Theory and conjecture, so those are guesses. So they're guessing Africa, we're guessing Inca. Let's go.
Here is your host, Robert Bitto.
Welcome, and muy bienvenidos to episode number 159 of Mexico Unexplained, where we examine the magic, the mysteries, and the miracles of Mexico. I'm your host, Robert Bitto. Sometime in the early 1560s, a galleon left the west coast of Africa, near the modern nation of Gabon, carrying a precious cargo of slaves bound for the New World. The final destination of this ship would be the colony of New Spain, and the cargo on board would be sold at the slave markets at Veracruz on the Gulf Coast. For a few decades after the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, native labor was used to work the mines and the plantations of the territories that would later become the country of Mexico. The Spanish king, Charles V, allowed African slaves to be imported into the New World as the
Spanish King Charles V. This is why we took our time with this. That's why we took our time on you. All Naga Royals. XX, man. All Naga Royals. You know, and if they want to turn them into something else, take our time. By the time we get to the succession of royals, they had to start painting these faces white, right? We know we're talking Charles Kent.
Ghost Online.
No, we're talking Haughty Eyes Charles. Oh, Haughty Eyes Charles. Roman Emperor Charles. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Charles. Okay, just make it clear. Charles did what?
Labor was used to work the mines and the plantations of the territories that would later become the country of Mexico. The Spanish king, Charles V, allowed African slaves to be imported into the New World as the native labor force diminished due to...
And they say we diminished due to sickness, or did we just not, were we not good slaves? Did we keep fighting back? Was it constant revolution? Right, let's go.
Overwork and disease. Initially, African slaves were brought to Mexico from the Spanish colonies of the West Indies, but by the middle of the 1500s, ships sailed directly from Africa to New Spain.
So they're saying that first it was brought from the West Indies? What are we talking about? Jamaica to Mexico? Trinidad to Mexico? Haiti to Mexico? So you in Mexico as a nigga, and they say you from Africa. You're like, nigga, I came from Haiti. I came from Jamaica. They were taking us from the West Indies again and bringing us to Mexico. Then they make the story that Yanga got off a boat and he asked the place in West Africa he came from, and we say we in West Africa, man, Northwest Africa.
World as the native labor force diminished due to overwork and disease. Initially, African slaves were brought to Mexico from the Spanish colonies of the West Indies, but by the middle of the 1500s, ships sailed directly from Africa to New Spain. On that galleon previously mentioned, which left the area of Gabon in the early 1560s, was a young man named Yanga or Nyanga. According to popular history, this slave named Yanga hailed from the nobility of the West African Yangbada tribe and was a prince. Yanga's inner nobility struggled to break free as he toiled on the sugar plantation called Nuestra Señora de la Concepción in tropical Mexico. By 1570, he had had enough. Now known by his Christian name of Gaspar Yanga, the young and robust slave revolted against his masters. Encouraging fellow slaves to rise up, Yanga and his small group would kill 23 Spaniards who tried to subdue them. After breaking away from the plantation, he led that group of fellow Africans to freedom in the unknown wilderness.
In the wilderness, he took his people to the wilderness. Sounds very biblical.
In the mountains of Veracruz, Yanga and his group formed one of the first palenques, or autonomous communities of escaped slaves. The Spanish were aware that the palenques existed, and so were the slaves. So over time, both groups, the Spanish and any slaves who managed to escape, searched for these hidden communities. Yanga's village grew and thrived by farming and hunting.
So these were like safe cities, like in the scripture, you know what I'm saying? We had safe cities, cities of refuge for the Hebrew.
And sometimes allied with various indigenous groups, even taking in some native people and intermarrying,
or are they the same people? Or are these indigenous people marrying their own people? Let's go.
Marrying with them. No doubt, Yanga's people learned much about the terrain and about how to grow and harvest local fruits and vegetables from their indigenous neighbors.
Or they are the indigenous. Let's go.
For the most part, the palenques were pretty self-sufficient, although occasionally Yanga and his followers felt the need to raid Spanish caravans on the Camino Real or Royal Road. This royal highway links the Gulf Coast with Mexico City and the rest of the central highlands of New Spain. Much merchandise unloaded at the docks at the port of Veracruz was transported overland on this route, and each caravan carried a wide variety of goods. Yanga's people were looking for weapons and anything else that would be useful in their hidden communities, such as tools, housewares, and cloth. The raids on the Royal Road were relatively infrequent, so as not to draw too much attention to the palenques. Over time, however, these raids became a small thorn in the side of the Spanish and got the attention of the authorities, not only in the colonial capital of Mexico City, but as far away as Spain itself. It was only a matter of time before a formal confrontation would occur.
Oh, Miss Dodges.
What is vegetable storage?
That might be me.
That's part of today's moving and storage options. Be ready for the next.
No, that ain't you, man. That's Claymore victim.
Who put that there?
Nice.
The expedition led by Pedro González de Herrera left the city of Puebla.
Hunter 1.
The contingent included some 550 men, of which only 100 were Spanish regulars. Conscripts, mercenaries, and an assorted group of adventurers of various backgrounds made up the rest of González's attack force. Yanga gathered together some 500 fighters from his small network of villages. Only 100 had firearms. The rest were to meet the Spanish with bows and arrows, and the group also used wooden handheld spear throwers from the local indigenous people. As Gaspar Yanga was too old to lead his people into battle himself, he named Francisco de la Matosa as the commander of the rebel fighters. Matosa had been captured in Angola by Portuguese slavers and had been transported to Mexico as a young boy. Yanga did not think that his people could score a victory against the Spanish, but his strategy was to cause enough damage to make the Spaniards come to the negotiating table. In the early days of the confrontation, Yanga's people had captured a Spanish soldier and gave him terms to remit to his superiors. Yanga made his demands simple and clear. Number 1, he wanted self-rule of the escaped slave Palenques and recognition of their inhabitants' status as free men. In exchange, the communities would pay the Spanish crown tribute, much as newly conquered indigenous groups had done in the past. Number 2, Yanga promised to aid the Spanish and fight alongside them in case a foreign power attacked New Spain. Number 3.
Again, conjecture, we don't know what the real terms are. You know, they make it sound like a treaty of peace and friendship. Man. Your enemy's gonna be our enemy. Your friends are our friends. You know, maybe Yanga was trying to play that. Same thing with like the Tecumseh in Britain. You know, sometimes you have to maneuver and try to use them against each other like they was using you against each other. Sometimes, you know, Tecumseh is like, look, maybe I can use Britain, you know, against these, so-called American forces. You know, sometimes, you know, Yanga said, let me use the Spanish against the French, against the British. Even though we know, hindsight's 2020, it wasn't none of them treaties honored. I think if the Nagas can go back in time in their DeLorean, they'll take all these treaties back. They'll be Confederate against the hijack.
The special self-governing district of former slaves would not take in any new escaped slaves and would return any new escapees to Spanish authorities. Yanga included the last provision in his demands to try to reassure any slave owners in the region who might be worried that Yanga's special autonomous district would encourage future slave revolts and escapes. The Spanish considered carefully the terms of Yanga's peace treaty and refused to grant them. The result was an all-out war. The Spanish found the location of Yanga's principal village and burned it to the ground.
So he never even did the treaty. You know, maybe it was a bluff. Maybe they said, man, we know you're going to try to help your people. We're going to go to war regardless. So why didn't they accept the treaty if he's supposed to be some treaty-making person? Clearly, they knew he wasn't going to be rocking with them. Clearly, they knew he was hijack free, and they had to step up and just go to war with this Naga. They didn't even bother making the treaty. That's how much this Naga was about, you know, really on their head. Like, they didn't even bother. They said, look, man, let's just go ahead and get him, man, because we already know what time it is. That's that Inca flow, right?
Rio Blanco, a large battle ensued, with many casualties on both sides. The remaining population of the Palenques, the women and children and some indigenous allies, and the rest of the rebel force took to the mountains. Because they knew the terrain well, Yanga and his people waged a guerrilla war against the
They couldn't do that unless they were indigenous, and their stories only brought in. Is the copper colored racist found here?
Get beamed by Monkey Squad. Faggot Static is a big Buddhist rag. Fortnite.
We see clearly.
The Spanish. The colonial government in Mexico.
Shout out to Conclave, man. Conclave. Can't talk to this Yanga flow. Man, the bro got some great convo on the Yanga flow. Hey, Conclave.
Those cities sent reinforcements, more regulars and more mercenaries and adventurers to try to smoke
what
out
the
the rest
fuck are
of the
you
rebel
listening to,
forces.
bro?
But the best they could do is achieve a stalemate. In 1618, a full 9 years after the fighting began, under a flag of truce, the Spanish sent an emissary to meet with Yanga to discuss terms. In a brief back and forth that lasted only a few weeks, the Spanish agreed to Yanga's original peace treaty with 2 additional provisos. Number 1, the Palenques would have no contact with the outside world except for Franciscan priests who administer to the villages.
Damn. So we'll take your treaty if you let us brainwash you. If you take in our Franciscan hijack missionaries on a mission to brainwash and hijack the Naga.
1 minute remaining.
And what's the other provision?
The settlements would also be open to outsiders on market days.
Whoa, that's like your Shabbat being invaded. So they can come on market days to make money and break bread with your people. Hijack 101.
Number 2, Yanga's family would be granted the right to rule over the special autonomous region in perpetuity. Having a self-governing region of former slaves was unprecedented.
You mean to tell me I'm the only one that died then?
In the revised peace,
Unbelievable.
essentially established the first and possibly only African dynasty ever to have been established in the...
And you're gonna say what happened? Like, even according to their treaty, that means his family should still be ruling in Veracruz, in Mexico.
Bomb secure.
Not as a foreign African, but as the indigenous, autochthonous, original. That means we as originals can go back and claim to be the family of Yanga, Inca, right here, and still have rulership in at least Veracruz, at least the city of Yanga. You know what I'm saying? Dragon Flitter.
in the New World. The former slaves rebuilt their main village, making it the administrative and commercial center of the new autonomous region. They christened the town San Lorenzo de los Negros de Cerralvo in honor of a Jesuit priest named Juan Lorenzo, who played an important role in the original negotiations in
The city of the Naga is what they call that.
1609. Although the inhabitants of these free communities swore allegiance to the Spanish crown and the Catholic Church, they never paid the tribute promised in the 1618 peace treaty.
They never gave them hijack shit.
The Spanish didn't care as long as the raids on the caravan ceased and all runaway slaves were returned, which did happen. So the Spanish left the area alone. Yanga's villages thrived, growing maize, beans, and mangoes and remaining self-sufficient. Across time, others eventually moved into the area and blended in with the well-established free black communities. In 1932, the town of San Lorenzo de los Negros was renamed Yanga in honor of its founder, and a statue was erected near the center of town soon after. The town and the statue survive to this day. And what of Yanga's legacy? Outside the small area of the Mexican state of Veracruz, very few people had ever heard of Gaspar Yanga until the publication of an anthology in 1870 called El Libro Rojo, or The Red Book in English. The author of the book was Vicente Ribas Palacio, the grandson of Mexico's first black president, Vicente Guerrero.
First black president. You think that's even possible unless the indigenous people are melanated, man? If this was a white area or area of other people that were not Negroid in phenotype, they would not be even popping off with the hijack black president. When you know a black man is invading you, King of Spain, Roman Emperor, Holy Roman Emperor Charles Quinto, you think this black man is invading an area that's non-black? That's not what the painting looked like.
1 minute remaining.
So back, hijack, and witness the Moromo War and reestablish the true seed of Hasharah and keep the code to break their spell.
Rivas was the first to dub Yanga the first liberator of the Americas and brought him into Mexico's national consciousness.
Not the liberator of Africa, the liberator of the Americas, my nugget.
First to dub Yanga the first liberator of the Americas and brought him into Mexico's national consciousness. Although provisions in the treaty allowed for family succession in ruling the area granted autonomy by the Spanish crown, very little information exists about Yanga's descendants beyond brief reports about his son in the years after the peace settlement. In fact, the modern town of Yanga includes very few people of African descent among its population of 20,000. Researchers theorize that many original settlers of the town of Yanga intermixed with outsiders to a great degree, or they relocated to nearby villages,
Or they were rooted out like the original black
Unit 1,
Germans.
set security on the objectives.
Rooted out like the original black Irish, the original black Scottish, the original Nagas all across the plain, original Chinese, Indian Nagas, American Nagas, European Nagas. Rooted out like everywhere else, Jack. You come looking like this, saying that you're the indigenous Mexican, Guatemala. Where you from? What Central America place are you from? And tell me you came looking like this originally? You better restore these Nagas. The game is over. Time is up.
still have visible Afro-Mexican populations.
The enemy planted
These
a ground.
villages are Mata Clara, Cuitahuac, Mata Caña, Guajilote, and Piedra Gorda. All
Now I'm gonna back it up. You write this down. For my Nagas in Mexico, my Nagas traveling. These might be some spots where Nagaville, you know what I'm saying, can really be rooted at. You know what I'm saying? If I was going to Mexico, you know, I'm looking for the Naga spots. I'm looking for Veracruz. I'm looking for Yanga. Where else?
Mexico's national consciousness. Although provisions in the treaty allowed for family succession in ruling the area granted autonomy by the Spanish crown, very little information exists about Yanga's descendants beyond brief reports about his son in the years after the peace settlement. In fact, the modern town of Yanga includes very few people of African descent among its population of 20,000. Researchers theorize that many original settlers of the town of Yanga intermixed with outsiders to a great degree, or they relocated to nearby villages, which still have visible Afro-Mexican populations. These villages are Mata Clara, Cuitahuac, Mata Caña, Guajilote, and Piedra Gorda, all in the state of Veracruz. Although the physically
So Veracruz is popping for a night.
the African population may not exist, or may just exist in trace amounts in the town of Yanga today, the current citizens robustly celebrate their connection to the first liberator of the Americas. Each year,
Even the hijacks there gotta say that Yanga's their foundation. So if Nagas like us walk around, they gonna definitely be like, oh, y'all them younger Nagas.
Since the early 1980s, in the middle of August, the town holds their Carnaval de la Negritud in conjunction with the feast to honor San Lorenzo, which is
That's Carnival of the niggas, man. Let's go.
been the patron saint of the town ever since the days of Gaspar Yanga. The carnival has been growing in popularity over the years. It has attracted the attention of tourists, especially African Americans from the United States. Researchers continue to piece together the story of Gaspar Yanga, trying to use primary source material to fill in the blanks of what mostly amounts to oral history, fragmentary historical accounts, and legends.
So they don't know shit. It says a big carnival popping off. Let me get this screenshot, man. Yeah, we popping off, man. We talking about Yanga, the Inca. It's a carnival of the Negro popping off, and a lot of African Americans are showing up. A lot of original Nagas are showing up.
We lost the
Get that
round.
back.
Be ready for the next.
Or may just exist in trace amounts in the town of Yanga today. The current citizens robustly celebrate their connection to the first liberator of the Americas. Each year since the early 1980s, in the middle of August, the town holds their Carnaval de la Negritud in conjunction with the feast to honor San Lorenzo, which has been the patron saint of the town ever since the days of Gaspar Yanga.
Who's Lorenzo, man? Stay tuned for another drop.
The carnival has been growing in popularity over the years and has attracted the attention of tourists, especially African Americans from the United States. Researchers continue to piece together the story of Gaspar Yanga, trying to use primary source material to fill in the blanks of what mostly amounts to oral history, fragmentary historical accounts, and legends. Within the past 10 to 20 years, there has been a great interest in Afro-Mexican identity and history, and many feel the need to put Gaspar Yanga in his proper context.
Ain't that Drop Nation like, man? There's a surge in the interest from the Naga. Afro-Mexicans, Afro-Mexicans. Meshi is Moshe. If you're a Mexican, then you are the tribes of Moses. Don't get mad that these Nagas is claiming to be the tribes of Moshe, because the tribes of Moshe are Nagas.
Popularity over the years, it has attracted the attention of tourists, especially African Americans from the United States. Researchers continue to piece together the story of Gaspar Yanga, trying to use primary source material to fill in the blanks of what mostly amounts to oral history, fragmentary historical accounts, and legends. Within the past 10 to 20 years, there has been a great interest in Afro-Mexican identity and history, and many feel the need to put Gaspar Yanga in his proper context. For an overview of Africans in Mexico, please see Mexico Unexplained episode number 99, titled
All Jaeger, detonate the target to win.
As mentioned earlier, this
Why would the Afro-Mexicans be hidden? And if you're claiming the heritage today, and you realize you got a whole hidden people, you're going to have to get up off that. Because you can't suppress it, because that makes you the hijack. You know what I'm saying? It makes you the hijack if you ain't telling the truth. If you're saying your land ain't not a land, you ain't telling the truth. You're not supporting these great people, this great tribe.